You are now tapped into the Corrected Felon Podcast with your host, Inspire the Block, aka the Lone Wolf on the Middle Passage Media Network.
What up, though? And welcome to another episode of the Corrected Felon Podcast with me, your host, Inspire the Block, aka the Triple OG, aka the Lone Wolf, aka the Corrected Felon, or simply known to my friends and family as Corey. Thank y'all for constantly tapping in with your boy time in and time out. I would be remiss if I didn't ask y'all to please subscribe, like, comment, and share the Corrected Felon Podcast on all your audio streaming platforms where you find your favorite podcasts, and also on social media such as YouTube and any other place you can find the Corrected Felon Podcast. Do that favor for your boy. All right, now, once again, thank y'all. I can't thank you enough for rocking with your boy, because over here on the Corrected Felon Podcast, we like to have substantive conversations, and there's something going on right now in the country that I think is warranted of our attention and conversation. Well, this is gonna be a twofold podcast. The first part of the podcast is gonna be a Corrected Felon podcast version, and also part 2 will be a 922G TV podcast, because the information that's coming out of Mississippi today is a bill that was signed into law, and it is being executed as we speak right now, effectively of July 1st. And what is going on in Mississippi right now, like I said, it's going to be a two-part conversation, because one of it deals with juveniles directly and guns, and the other one deals with the type of gun law that I believe states need to follow so that we don't infringe on people's Second Amendment right, even for those that's been convicted of felonies. So like I said, you have to tap into 922G TV in order to get that second part of it. But today, right now on the Corrected Felon Podcast, we're going to deal with the first aspect of it. And like I said, right now in Mississippi has new laws that is targeting youth accused of committing crimes with firearms. Why is this so important to me? Well, first, let's look at it from this perspective right here. Mississippi, the great state of Mississippi, is the population, or has the largest population of black residents than any other state in America. Yep, that's where all black folks is really at, down in Mississippi. And they have a population of almost 40%, 38% to be exact, black people make up the population of Mississippi. Also, too, Louisiana's number 2 with 33%. Georgia's 33%. Maryland, 32% of black people reside in that state, make up that population. And also in Alabama, 26.8% of black people make up that population. Reason why I'm actually even pointing out the black population in these states, and especially in Mississippi, because once again, like I said, this new law that's going into effect, it's been in effect since July 1st, and we is now on July 20th, and this information hasn't made any headlines, is because it's no kept secret that I'm actively and heavily involved in juvenile justice. I was a juvenile that was convicted and sentenced as an adult. And so these kind of issues, they stick with me. They bother with me. And after I actually indulge into the information of what's going on with these cases, I have to give my opinion about it. Because if the information isn't put out there, then you don't know it. So like I said, started July 1st. Senate Bill 2017 went into effect, which outlines minors accused of certain firearm-related cases will be sent to adult circuit court instead of youth court. These cases include violent crimes, possession or trafficking of stolen firearms, drive-by shootings, or other firearm crimes, and illegal firearm possessions tied to felonies. So what they're doing essentially down here, or down in Mississippi, is that if a juvenile is caught with a stolen firearm, or in the commission or committed allegedly a crime with a stolen firearm, then those crimes would not be tried in a juvenile court, but in an adult or circuit court for adults. I got this information out of the Mississippi Clarion Ledger. This is a story that was put forth by a lady by the name of Pam Dinkins. I'm guessing she's a writer or contributor for this local newspaper in Mississippi. And she had the privilege of sitting down with the sheriff of Hinds County, which is the home to Jackson, Mississippi, and also to the Jackson, Mississippi police chief. And regarding this new law, she also reached out to the Mississippi Department of Public Safety Health Commissioner Sean Tyndale, but he only issued a brief statement regarding the new law. In his statement, it reads as quoted, "When juveniles commit crimes with a firearm, the results can be deadly," Tyndale said, "for parents, grandparents, and most importantly, juveniles. The message is clear. If you commit adult crimes, you will be subject to adult consequences." And that's how he ended the conversation, or his quote regarding the new law that went into effect in Mississippi July 1st. Like I said, to reiterate, juveniles now in Mississippi will, if committed any crime with a stolen firearm, will be held to the same standard and consequences as adults. But also, too, like I said, with this same bill, local law enforcement also had the opportunity to be asked a few questions regarding this new law, and I think that they gave answers well enough to have a conversation too. So first is Hinds County Sheriff Tyree Jones, and also to the point, I will point out just for the record that the sheriff is a black man, and the chief of police of Jackson, Mississippi, is a black woman. So it's kind of important to them with these laws when it comes or regarding juveniles and also the community, because they're going to have to be the ones that execute the law and uphold the law, but also have that bridge of connection with the community. And so one of the questions that was posed to both the sheriff and the chief of police, the question says, "What can you share to parents, grandparents, guardians, etc. about the new law?" Sheriff Tyree Jones responded by saying, "We are currently educating parents and youth, pretty much engaging them on a weekly basis, letting them know that accountability starts at home. If there is no accountability at home, then there is no consequences at the home for some of the bad decisions. Then our youth and our younger generation could potentially find themselves involved in crimes that would fit within the realm of this new law. It's a matter of educating, mentoring, talk to them, and sharing real life information. The laws are the laws. We can't change the laws. Whether we agree with the laws or not, these people still have to be held accountable. But accountability starts before they get to the corrective system with law enforcement." And I agree with that. Accountability does starts at home. And this is one of the reasons why I believe these conversations are so important. Because what we're expecting, or what Mississippi is expecting, that even though a child may come from a home to where there's absent the accountability that the sheriff is asking for, that still is a gateway to be punished the same as adults. Like, this new law leaves no room per se for any of this stuff to be held, not necessarily accountable, but also to be interjected in the conversation when we're considering charging and sentencing juveniles the same as as adults. This same question, Jackson Police Chief Rochelle Brickney, she answered it this way: "My message to parents, grandparents, guardians, and every adult who plays a role in raising our young people is simple. Your engagement matters more than ever. Have honest conversations about the consequences of carrying firearms, associating with criminal activity, and making decisions that can permanently alter a young person's future. Know where your children are, who they are spending time with, and what influences are shaping their choices. Encourage positive activities, maintain open communication, and seek support when challenges arise. Our community is strongest when families, schools, faith leaders, community organizations, and law enforcement work together to prevent violence before it occurs. The Jackson Police Department remains committed to partnering with our community to keep our neighborhoods safe while investing in strategies that reduce violence, support victims, and provide young people with opportunities to choose a better path. You could tell that she answered that with a little bit more compassion than the actual sheriff. And typically black women do have more compassion than men. Black men, white men don't make no difference. But you can tell that she has a quite bit of not necessarily understanding, but concern, because she understands how this law is going to affect our youth. Another one of the questions that was asked to the sheriff and chief of police: what do you anticipate will be the immediate bottleneck or strain on Hinds County Adult Detention Center and court systems once these juvenile cases begin flooding the circuit court docket? The sheriff responded by saying it could be a strain on the youth detention center, which would eventually become a strain on the adult detention center, because once they turn 18, they come from a youth facility and go to an adult facility. As of June 29, 2026, we have 48 juveniles charged as an adults in our jail. We are currently housing 920 pretrial detainees in our jails as of just this morning. So we're looking for that to potentially increase once the new law goes into effect. So that you can see right there that he can see a concern in the increase of juveniles being transitioned from youth facilities over to the adult corrective facility. The chief of police responded as well to the same question, but a little bit differently. She says, as with any significant change in criminal justice policy, implementation may present operational challenges for agencies throughout the system. Those impacts could include increasing demands on detention capacity, prosecutors, public defenders, court personnel, and judicial resources. The Jackson Police Department will continue working closely with our criminal justice partners to ensure cases are investigated thoroughly and processed efficiently while maintaining the integrity of the judicial system. So pretty much a little basic answer as the sheriff did when it comes to the increase in housing of juveniles when they transition from juvenile facilities to adult detention centers. Another question was asked: how do you think that the punitive shift from youth court to adult circuit court will deal with the root causes of the capital city's gun violence? The Sheriff Jones responded by saying, I believe that some of this should be a case-by-case basis, whereas I don't disagree with the law itself. But we're already charging juveniles with gun crimes between the ages of 13 and 17 as adult presently. And the law has been into effect for many, many years. We would like to see some type of intervention before it gets to the point of automatic circuit court for some of these new changes that will fit within the realm of this new law. Instead of automatically charging them as an adult, or if you do charge them as an adult, have a program in place where if they complete a certain portion of a program, or if they take part in an intervention program, then they will not be charged as an adult. They can transfer it back to the youth court, or the charges can be settled in a different way instead of just automatically transferring them to circuit court from youth court. You can see right there the sheriff was really trying to say that they need some other type of intervention than what's going on. Of course, criminal behavior has to be prosecuted. Criminal behavior has to be punished. This is why we have a system in place, such as laws, jails, detention centers, so that when these acts do happen in our society, we have to correct them. But however, correcting juveniles in an adult system does not, in my belief and in my opinion, deter criminal behavior, nor does it bring a solution to the problem of violence in our community. Like the whole ideal of just locking them up. Let me know where in the world has that been successful in America or in the world, period. Now, well, let me take that back. I'm just going to limit it to America. Because the rest of the world, they have very low crime rates based on the laws that they have. But here in America, show me an outline to where more laws have prevented less crimes, and especially more laws, tougher laws targeted juveniles has prevented juveniles from committing crimes. Somebody can show me the data to that. Find me some information. Just hit me up in my Gmail at correctedfelons@gmail.com. So if anybody can provide me with that to show that there's a reduction in crime anytime we produce new crime laws, I'll be willing to take a look at it and talk about it over the podcast. But from my understanding, more laws do not prevent more crime. Chief of Police Brinkley answered that question by saying gun violence is a complex issue that cannot be solved solely through prosecution. Facts, it cannot. While accountability is an essential component of public safety, we must also recognize that many young people involved in violent crime have experienced trauma, instability, limited opportunities, or exposure to violence at an early age. Lasting reductions in gun violence require a comprehensive strategy that includes prevention, intervention, education, mentorship, family support, and enforcement. Legislation can address accountability, but is only one piece of a much larger public safety framework. And I agree with that because once again, she's pointing out the causes to a lot of these problems amongst our youth. Like, they're not just coming out the womb bad children. The reason why I can speak so boldly on this because I was one of those youth. I was a young youth running wild in the streets that went to prison, spent over 17 years behind prison, and now I'm going on my 14th year of freedom. The root causes that caused me to end up in the streets was the fact that I suffered from neglect from my parents. My mother, my biological father, didn't want me because he had a whole nother family. That's a whole different conversation one day for the Corrected Felon Podcast. And maybe I'll get to that. But I suffered from a lot of that. My mother used drugs. My stepfather was an alcoholic. I grew up in a gang-infested neighborhood. I grew up with drug dealers, lived on the same block. So, of course, I was heavily influenced by the environment in which I was coming from. But young minds are impressionable. So when we understand that a lot of this happens in the community, no fault to these young people of their own, because for the most part, they can't change the reality, the circumstances in which they're growing up in. They only have to navigate through it because they have no power. They have no control. They're children. If we're talking about a child who is being physically abused in the home and later in life because of that trauma decides that this is the same pattern that they're going to go down, punishment isn't the only fix to that. Physical punishment is not the only fix. Sending them off to prison for a long time is not the only fix. But like the sheriff said, there need to be intervention way before they get to the elements of criminality. The last question that was presented to the judge, the Haines County Sheriff and the Jackson Police Chief is this one here. Does your agency believe that bypassing the rehabilitative framework of the youth court and prosecuting minors as adults undermines long-term public safety efforts, and why? The sheriff responded by saying, I think that it does address it to a certain extent. But what we don't want to happen, what we are trying to avoid happening is our jail is full of juveniles charged as adults for crimes that didn't fit into the current category of what we're charging 13 and 17-year-olds with as an adult. Hopefully these laws will be adhered to and some of the youth won't find themselves in these particular situations. But in any event that they do, which we always have to prepare for, we have to be ready and available to house these individuals right now. Now, does it affect long-term public safety? I have not seen anything that would say we can't agree or disagree about the long-term public safety because what we're talking about is some of the crimes that would fit within the category and not necessarily the violent crimes. Do they lead to violent crimes? There's a strong indication that they may. That was the response of the sheriffs. Now, the Jackson police chief, Brickney, the Jackson Police Department respects the authority of the legislator and the courts to establish the legal framework under which we operate. Our responsibility is to enforce the law fairly and professionally. From a public safety perspective, accountability and rehabilitation should not be viewed as a competing priorities. When appropriate, rehabilitation can reduce recidivism and help young offenders become productive members of our society. At the same time, serious violent offenders demand accountability to protect victims in the broader community. Ultimately, long-term public safety is strengthened when our justice system has the flexibility to hold offenders accountable while also addressing the underlying factors that contribute to criminal behavior. I think that's important, that last line when she says, ultimately, long-term public safety is strengthened when our justice system has the flexibility to hold offenders accountable while also addressing the underlying factors that contribute to criminal behavior. Based on the answers of the sheriff and Tyree Jones, Hinds County Sheriff Tyree Jones, and also to Jackson Police Chief Rochelle Brickney, you can tell based on their responses that they're not too fond of that law because they understand the impact that it's going to have, not only on them professionally, but also within the black community in Mississippi. Like I said, you can just see in the language that they're not too fond about that. And my point is this: why is this so important to me? Because we in America believe that crime is understood the same regardless of age and maturity and development. Well, at the very least, we want to punish it as if it's the same on the level of thinking and maturity and growth. But since 2005, the United States Supreme Court been having a different look when it comes to punishing juveniles here in America. And one of the conclusions that they came up with over a series of 4 cases, like I said, starting in 2005. The first one in 2005 was Roper versus Simmons. And just to give you a synopsis or a quick take on these cases, because I don't want to go too deep off into them, but you're more than welcome to look it up. In 2005, in Roper versus Simmons, the United States Supreme Court held that it was cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment to impose the death penalty on an individual who was under 18 at the time of their crime. The court reasoned that certain differences between children and adults demonstrate that juvenile offenders cannot with reliability be classified among the worst offenders. The justice also said, you have a lack of maturity and undeveloped sense of responsibility. They are more vulnerable and susceptible to negative influences and outside pressures, including peer pressure, and their character is not as well formed as that of an adult. Those differences diminish a child's culpability and render suspect any conclusion that a juvenile falls among the worst offenders. So charging juveniles as an adult and also prosecuting them on the same level as an adult is morally wrong and corrupt, because the Supreme Court said it best, that juveniles, they lack maturity and undeveloped sense of responsibility. They are more vulnerable or susceptible to negative influences and outside pressures, including peer pressure, and their character is not as well formed as that of an adult. So this is a case, Roper versus Simmons in 2005, how the United States Supreme Court ruled on it. They also went further on to say in this same case that the reality that juveniles still struggle to define their identity means it is less supportable to conclude that even a heinous crime committed by a juvenile is evidence of irretrievable depraved character. From a moral standpoint, it would be misguided to equate the failings of a minor with those of an adult, for a greater possibility exists that a minor's character deficiencies will be reformed. What they're saying in this Roper versus Simmons case back in 2005 is that to charge and punish juveniles the same as adults is wrong, because juveniles, even though they have this ability to not understand or comprehend things real well, they still have a greater chance of change and to not be looked at as the most dangerous members of our society. In 2010, this is Graham versus Florida. In 2010, in Graham versus Florida, the United States Supreme Court held that the Eighth Amendment categorically prohibits life without parole sentences for juveniles who commit non-homicidal crimes. In such cases, states must provide juveniles with a meaningful opportunity to obtain release based on demonstrated maturity and rehabilitation. In concluding that children who committed non-homicidal crimes may not receive life without parole, the court reasoned that the age of the offender and the nature of the crime each bear on the analysis. So this is a ruling back in 2010 that when the United States Supreme Court, they said that children who committed crimes, non-homicidal crimes, should have an opportunity to be released because they have more of an opportunity to demonstrate maturity and rehabilitation. Here go one of the big cases that happened back in 2012 with the Supreme Court regarding juveniles. In 2012, the United States Supreme Court held in Miller versus Alabama that mandatory life without parole sentences violates the Eighth Amendment when imposed on children. Under Miller, children facing the possibility of life without parole sentences are entitled to individualized sentences, and the sentence must give mitigating effort to the characteristics and circumstances of youth. Miller reasoned that children are constitutionally different from adults for purposes of sentences, and therefore imposing imposition of a state's most severe penalties on juvenile offenders cannot process as though they were not children. As in Roper and Graham, the court in Miller emphasized the capacity of children to rehabilitate. The court stated that children have greater prospects for reforms than adults, and a mandatory life without parole sentence disregards the possibility of rehabilitation even when the circumstances most suggest it. Think about that, what I just read. That was a deciding case in 2012 where, like I said, life without parole sentences violated. The Supreme Court found violated the Eighth Amendment. Why? Once again, because children have a greater chance of rehabilitation than those of an adult. And the fourth case was Montgomery versus Louisiana. In 2016, the U.S. Supreme Court held in Montgomery versus Alabama that Montgomery versus Louisiana, that Miller versus Alabama applies retroactively to final convictions on collateral review. Montgomery also makes clear that the Eighth Amendment places a ceiling on punishment for the vast majority of children. In particular, a life without parole sentence may not be imposed on a child convicted of homicide unless the sentencer makes a determination after giving mitigating effort to the characteristics and circumstances of youth that the particular child exhibits such irretrievable depravity that rehabilitation is impossible. Absent such a finding, the child must have a meaningful opportunity for release based on demonstrated maturity and rehabilitation. Once again, in these four cases, landmark cases here in America, in these cases, we're dealing with the severe cases here in America. Most of them were violent crimes. I believe, other than one. And even in those cases, the United States Supreme Court found it unconstitutional to punish children the same as we do adults. Why? Because we're talking about children. We were all once children, and we understand how change works when it comes to children. So why in the world are we willing and okay with prosecuting and sentencing children the same as we would adults when we know there is a difference in maturity and brain development between an adult and a child? We have to do something about this. This can't be the norm in America, to where we always, when we look to punish people, we look to punish children in the same light that we would an adult. This is a practice in America that should never be happening. Seriously, I understand this shit happens. I understand this children nowadays do some very, very violent things. But once again, we still have to keep in view that they're children and that they deserve the opportunity to be punished as such. And so once again, this is the information that I want to bring forth right here on the Corrected Felon Podcast. Like I said, there's a part 2 to this. But the part 2 of this will be a 922G TV podcast, because it deals more so with the 2A aspect of what they're doing down there. Well, I should say down there, over there in Mississippi. I'm living right here in Georgia. So once again, I need y'all to please subscribe, like, comment, and share the Corrected Felon Podcast. Get in the comments. Tell me what y'all think about this new law that's going on over here in Mississippi. Does it unfairly target black children? Yes, it does. I don't even need y'all answer on that. And should we, as a society as a whole, prosecute and punish juveniles the same as we would adults? That's the conversation we're having over here on the Corrected Felon Podcast. Once again, make sure y'all please subscribe, like, comment, and share the Corrected Felon Podcast. No matter the platform, as long as you're hearing this or seeing this, do the essentials. Come on, help your boy out. Help your boy get to the top of this podcast space. Because, like I said, on the Middle Passage Media Network, whether it's the Corrected Felon Podcast or 922G TV, we giving relevant information, and we ain't dumbing the people down. What we doing is lifting them up by providing information that you definitely can use in your everyday life. So once again, continue to rock with your boy. Y'all be safe out there, and I pray that everybody in listening world and viewing world have a blessed day on purpose.
FDO, FTL, first day out, bitch. Fuck the feds, walked out the jail. I saw 6 phones. I just got out the bunk bed.